James Ernest, Gruel and Truth Radio Network, here with author Rob Neyer of Powerball, Anatomy of a Modern Baseball Game. So tell us, how important is sabermetrics?
Well, I mean, sabermetrics, which for better or worse is now almost universally referred to as analytics, because that encompasses all sports. It really informs everything that everyone does to one degree or another. Every team now has a team of people in the front office dedicated to analytics or sabermetrics. Some franchises have 3 or 4 people working on this stuff. Some teams have a dozen or more than a dozen people working on it. But they've all made investments, both financially and in terms of personnel.
Yeah, I mean, remember though, about 20 years ago when people thought, "Oh, that's crazy," and then maybe 1 or 2 teams had it. Now, yeah,
I do remember, and one felt like a voice in the wilderness crying out for these things, and I certainly took, as a writer at the time, talking about it, I certainly took my fair share of heat from people saying that the numbers didn't make any sense. You couldn't measure heart, chemistry, all those other things. But the change was inevitable. It was just a question of how long it took. But you weren't going to deny the applicability and the relevance of the numbers eventually, and other things too. When we talk about sabermetrics and analytics, people think it's all about the numbers, and to a large degree that's true. But what it's really about is information. And what the people that I talk to, what they crave isn't numbers per se, it's information, and that can come in a variety of ways.
If Oakland was Moneyball and Houston is Powerball, how do they compare? How do they contrast?
Well, I think that they try to do a lot of the same things. What's interesting to me, and I've never really quite figured out why this has happened, is that the A's have never invested a great deal of money in analytics. They were sort of first, or if not first, they were close to first. They were certainly the first team that was famous for doing this stuff. They never really jumped all the way in, though, in terms of making an investment, as the Astros have and the Dodgers have. The Astros and Dodgers both have dozens of people who are working on the data and the information and all the questions and problems that arise. Whereas the A's still have a fairly small number of people who are devoted to that work. And I don't really understand why that is. I think that Billy Beane, who of course has famously been running the A's for quite a long time now, I think he's just not comfortable with 25 people crunching numbers and coming up with ideas. I think he's more comfortable with 5 or 6 or 7 people doing that, and that works for him. I mean, if you look at the A's success over the years, they've had some down years, but they've also been in the playoffs 3 or 4 times in the last 6 or 7 years, so it works for them too.
When or what do you feel calls people to really buy into the new movement?
Well, it was going to happen eventually, one way or the other, because the technology was going to be there, and people were going to ultimately use that technology. I think the process was accelerated, not precipitated, but accelerated by Michael Lewis writing a best-selling book. I mean, you can talk to people, and I think I quote 1 or 2 of them in the book, my book. When Moneyball came out and was this runaway bestseller, and everybody was reading it, you had baseball owners reading the book or hearing about the book at least, telling their people, their employees, the presidents of their clubs, the general manager, saying, wait a second, why aren't we doing this? I use the numbers in my business. the business that made me a billionaire. Why wouldn't we do the same sorts of things here in baseball? And the general managers who didn't have a good answer for that wound up not being GMs before too long, a lot of them anyway. And you wound up with a lot of younger GMs, Theo Epstein being the best example, or the earliest example, 29, I think, when he got the job as Red Sox general manager, but a number of others. We've seen a number of GMs in their late 20s, early 30s who got the jobs because they embraced that concept. They welcomed all this new information. And again, I think all those things would have happened even without Moneyball, but I think it happened a few years sooner because of that book.
It's just baffling, though. I mean, nowadays, how it feels every pitcher, can go out and throw so darn fast. Do we need the control pitchers, or is it just, all speedball?
Well, I think as a fan, I prefer to see control pitchers. I think that one of the things that we have lost, we've gained a great deal because of analytics, and other things too. I mean, the game is in many ways more interesting than it's ever been. In other ways, it's less interesting. There is no longer as much room for different sorts of players. I believe the Cleveland Indians led the league, the American League this season, with 135 stolen bases. Well, that's only 5 more than Ricky Henderson all by himself stole one season. Now, that's an extreme example, of course, but there aren't nearly as many steals or triples or great plays in the outfield or the infield as there used to be. There aren't as many finesse pitchers, obviously. You really can't survive throwing 85, 90 miles an hour these days unless you're a knuckleballer. And I think we have lost some things. I write about this in the book quite a bit. I would love for baseball at some point to say, you know what? Let's see if we can keep the great things that we've got, the exciting power hitters and power pitchers, and the diversity of players from all around the globe, but also get some of the things that we've lost back. Those, the Vince Colemans of the world, and the great shortstops, Ozzie Smith, yes. And Andrelton Simmons is a great shortstop, but he gets 20% fewer chances to make plays than Ozzie Smith did, just simply because there are so many fewer batted balls in play these days. So there is an ideal game out there, and you're never going to reach that ideal, but you can get a lot closer than they're at right now. But baseball has to acknowledge that there are some issues, and to this point, they're not really willing to grapple with those issues.
And it really just feels nowadays, all the hitters are, going for the home run. I mean, even the little guys, like you said, that, used to be, contact hitters are now trying to be power hitters. I mean, is that why there's no shame in a strikeout anymore?
Well, of course, absolutely. And they are, for the most part, they're the batters are chasing the runs, as they should. They should be trying to score and drive in and score as many runs as they can, changing your swing for a higher launch angle, hitting the ball, hitting more long fly balls, more line drives. That makes a lot of sense. For the most part, the players are playing the percentage game, as they should. If you're running a team, you want your guys scoring as many runs as they can. No question. But again, it gets back to the variety of experiences that I think we've lost a little bit. Yes, teams should optimize their strategies, their tactics to score runs and win games. But I don't think the sport should. The sport should be optimizing the game to make it more entertaining. And I'm not convinced that the average fan is most entertained by a steady parade of strikeouts and home runs. I could be wrong. Maybe what most of them want is video game baseball, but I'm not convinced. And I think what makes baseball interesting, the most entertaining, is to see as baseball players doing as many different baseball things as they can. And baseball's trending that at this point, and I think you have to arrest that trend line at some point.
Exactly. I mean, I know, they say that, that's going to help bring in the younger fans, but I agree with you. I want to see more diversity in the game. I want to see more of the double plays, the ground rule doubles, just the steals, just the more that makes the game sacrifice bunt, that makes baseball, as opposed to just, like you said, a couple home runs in a game, and then the rest of the time they're striking out or flying out. It gets old quick.
Well, I think so. And I mean, one of the just the little things that we don't even really think about, but one of the fun plays in baseball is a single to center field and a runner trying to advance from first to third base. Well, more than ever, he's not going to try. He'll stop a second, whether because he's not fast enough or because it just isn't worth the risk or whatever. But the triples, the Blue Jays in 2017 hit 5 triples all season, I think.
Oh, wow.
Well, they used to always say that was the most exciting play in baseball. Okay, well, we're just going to give up on that, I guess. To me, baseball seems to have lost its way a little bit. It seems to have forgotten why it's being played, that it's being played for the fans and not for the glorification of the Players Association or the TV executives. I'm just not sure who it's being played for at this point. At some point, I think if attendance continues to go down, and it was down 4% this year, they're going to start thinking, you know what? There might be a more entertaining, a better version of baseball that we could be playing. How do we get back to that?
Is there a difference between tanking and building a team?
I sure think so. I think tanking is literally an effort to lose. I think there's a distinction to be made between that and between losing now. We want to win this game today. We might not. We probably won't win it, but we do want to win. We're just not going to spend a great deal of money to get there. I would never recommend to a team that's rebuilding to go out and spend an extra $20 million this year or this winter so we can win 75 games next season instead of 70. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And frankly, you really can't do that because every team can't do that because there aren't that many wins that are available on the free market every winter. A few teams can do it. I think the best example of a team going out in the off season and getting better is typified by what the Brewers did last winter when they went out and signed Lorenzo Cain and traded for Kristen Yelich, and now look where they are. They're in the NLCS. That's how you can do that. But there aren't that many players to go around. Every team, every winter, can't go out and find 2 outstanding players. There aren't that many guys available. So, it's tough when your team is basically committed to losing 90 to 100 games for 2 or 3 years in a row. I get it. That's a rough thing for your fans to deal with. But the way the game is economically, the way it's played right now, I don't really see that teams have much choice.
Do you feel that baseball has their draft as important as in other sports?
Absolutely not. The hit rate on baseball draftees is so much lower than it is in the other sports, and especially in the short term. Baseball has decided to make their annual draft a TV event, which really hasn't worked. Yeah, a few diehards like us, we might watch it, but it's going to take so long for most of these kids to even make to the majors, let alone to be stars, as compared to the NBA or the NFL, where you can step right from the draft into being a star immediately. It just doesn't happen in baseball ever anymore. So it's never going to have that same importance, and that's why tanking, actively trying to have the worst record in the league, which does happen in football and basketball. It doesn't even make any sense in baseball because, sure, that number 1 guy, he's a pretty good bet to be a good major leaguer, but not a superstar. And the number 2, 3, 4 guys, they probably won't be stars. They'll probably make it to the majors. They'll probably be good, but it's going to take a while. They don't have the ability to turn a team around like a number one pick or number two pick in the NBA does.
If you were put in charge of a team, how would you do it? How would you build a team up?
I don't think there's one way to do it. You really have to do everything well, especially if you don't have a lot of money to spend. You want to draft well, but very few teams have ever been able to draft well year in, year out. When the Cardinals had a pretty good run, but they also had some bad drafts. Not bad drafts, but just not outstanding drafts. But the Astros, recently they seem to have sort of figured it out. So I would do all the analytic work that I could do to identify the good prospects in the draft. You obviously have to have a robust development system in the Dominican Republic, no question, because so much top talent comes from there. You have to have a good player development system. I mean, really what it comes down to, you have to be incredibly smart, and your owner has to commit to investing in all facets of the operation. If you neglect your scouting, you're not going to win. If you neglect your player development, you're not going to win. You've got to do it all well, and there's no magic formula.
Exactly. It's all about being well-rounded. I'd like to thank you, Rob, for being on the show today. If fans are wanting to follow you on social media or read some of your other stuff, where's the best place to do it?
Well, like everybody else, the best place is probably just go to Twitter, and you can sort of get from there to everything else. But and my Twitter handle is just ROBNEYER, Rob Neyer. And there's a link on my Twitter page to the new book, and I'm constantly promoting it and telling people where to find it. So I would be grateful for anyone who finds me there.
Excellent. It was our pleasure. We'd like to thank our guest, Rob Neyer, for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take